the bird that looks different from all the other birds around it. I'm sure you're seeing her now. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay. So, what's the appropriate question? What's wrong with this bird or what's wrong with these birds? Actually, there ain't nothing wrong with any of them birds, okay? They're different kind of birds, all right? It's kind of like looking at maybe it's the difference between looking at a supermodel and an athlete, okay? They're just, they may be built different. They have different purposes in their work, and they have different specializations in their wheelhouse, right? Okay, so it's kind of the same thing here. The white-feathered birds, let's start with them. What are they? They are meat birds, okay? Are there different kinds of meat birds? Yeah, kind of. There's different kinds of meat birds, but these are meat birds that are called Cornish rock cross meat chickens, and actually, when it comes to meat birds, these really are kind of the standard. Yes, you can find other breed types, hybrid types of chickens that can be raised for meat, but honestly, when it comes to meat production, this is the most efficient, highest quality meat bird you can get, okay? There are differences in these kind of birds from a lot of other breeds or types, but when it just comes right down to making quality meat as efficiently as we can, there really is not a breed or type that I know of that can outperform Cornish rock cross, okay? And so genetically speaking, Cornish rock cross, I'm going to have to put the camera here where we get that size comparison of these two types. But the one to the left is starting to sit down, but you can still see the big size difference. But meat chickens, I frequently compare them to designer dogs. So for example, we love Labrador retrievers, but Labrador retrievers shed a lot of hair, right? So one of the last times we got a dog that we knew we were going to keep in the house with us, my husband said, I don't want a dog that sheds. I don't want another dog that sheds in the house right now. So we started looking around at these kind of dogs we heard of called hypoallergenic dogs. And we said, what's a hypoallergenic dog? And they said a hypoallergenic dog is a dog that doesn't shed, so there's not pet dander, so people don't tend to have the allergy problems with those dogs around them that they would with a dog that sheds. And my husband said, that's the dog for us, okay? So we end up getting a designer dog called a teddy bear. In his case, he's a mix of a Bichon Frise and a Shih Tzu, and guess what? He doesn't shed, okay? But because he doesn't shed, he never lets go of his hair, right? So he's very specialized toward not shedding, and that actually does affect his quality of life and impact the management practices that we need to use as pet owners with him, right? Because the dog that doesn't shed, his hair is going to grow and grow and grow, and that's okay when it's a cold winter day. But when it's the heat of summer, he can become very, very hot and overheated very easily, right? So what do we have to do for our special hypoallergenic dog who's specialized not to shed? We got to go get him haircuts, right? Okay, so if we can take that train of thought and apply it to our meat birds, we can start to understand how, okay, this isn't a Frankenstein bird. We're not looking at monsters. This is a specialized bird to produce meat efficiently and rapidly, okay? So they are so specialized that we find that if we don't apply appropriate management practices to these birds, it does impact their quality of life to the negative. But if we want to make meat from chickens, and we are willing to manage the meat chickens that are specialized for meat production in particular ways, we can give them a positive quality of life, and we can produce meat rapidly and efficiently. We can produce excellent meat from them. So that's the deal with Cornish rock cross meat chickens. And so more to the point, genetically speaking, they are hybridized, probably from about 4 different breeds over 7 to 8 generations, okay? So that's why most of the time when people want to raise meat birds, they just go ahead and order hatchling chicks from big hatcheries, because the hatcheries maintain the specialized breeding programs that can keep like 7 to 8 generations of birds and do the genetics, do the breeding pairs of like 7 to 8 generations of birds, taking in maybe 4 combinations of breeds, right? Okay, a lot of the time, like on farm, we can't really duplicate that. Okay, so you'd have to have so many like holding pens and different living spaces for the different kinds of chickens and different generations of chickens. So that's, that's something to note about like birds like these, like meat chickens. Just like with my designer dog, so to speak. Not that I want a designer dog, but Mr. Twin Oaks wanted a dog that didn't shed. So just like with them, like with Gus, I guess you could take a, in his case, it had been a Bichon Frise and a Shih Tzu. I guess you could take the Bichon Frise parent and the Shih Tzu parent and breed them, and Gus is the first generation from that mating, and you have this hybrid dog. But it may be more complicated than that. I haven't researched designer dogs. I don't know if those are first generation crosses or not. I do know in the case of meat birds, this is not a first generation cross, meaning that this outcome that you're looking at, this does not happen from taking one set of parents and breeding them one time and you get this bird. That's not how they do this. So, they take probably 4 different breeds over a breeding program that is going to take 7 to 8 generations to accomplish. And that's how we get this bird. At least that's the research that I've read for Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens. Now, what's the difference? Okay, what's the difference? Well, let's take a look here. So we've got the Cornish Rock Cross meat chicken kind of on the left there that just sat down. And we've got the Rhode Island Red, and she's actually going to sleep is what y'all are seeing there. She's been up, been active, been to feeders, been to waters. She really is out of her element. I'll show you her group, but she's going to sleep there. So, okay, so she's a Rhode Island Red. So genetically speaking, she's more like our Labrador Retrievers or any purebred dog that you get. She's a kind of a heritage. Let me find her again. She's kind of a well, they are. Rhode Island Red are considered heritage breeds. She is going to sleep. Rhode Island Reds are considered heritage breed birds, okay? So that just basically means, let's put the camera over here so you can see some other ones. That just basically means it's a well-preserved lineage of genes, okay? Well-preserved gene pool. It's breed type, phenotype, physical characteristics has basically stayed the same and been maintained over years and years and over many, many generations, okay? So in terms of genetics, right, we would have a Rhode Island Red rooster, a Rhode Island Red hen. They would mate, incubate the egg. The hen would incubate it or be artificially incubated, and then you'd get a Rhode Island Red. So this can be the first generation from 2 purebred parents every time, right? And then, like, if we had roosters in this group, which we don't, this is all pullets, but if we had roosters in this group, then the implication of this genetics is we could take a rooster from these Rhode Island Reds and a hen from these Rhode Island Reds. We could have a mate. The first generation from them is going to preserve this genetic lineage, right? It's going to be another Rhode Island Red. Okay, that's not necessarily going to be the case over here. So what we call that here is they breed true, okay? If you breed a Rhode Island Red to a Rhode Island Red or any purebred to another purebred of the same kind, you're going to get a first generation outcome that's consistent with the parents. They breed true. Okay, that is not the case with meat birds. So this is a straight run flock. So there are roosters in here and there are hens in here. But if I saved a rooster from this flock and saved a hen from this flock and mated them, it does not guarantee that I'm going to get an outcome exactly like the birds in this flock, because these are hybrids that are not necessarily going to breed true if they're mated. In other words, you know, we don't necessarily know which genetic traits are going to express in the next generation. And that's, you know, it's kind of interesting. But that definitely sets apart a hybrid like Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens from a purebred strain like the Rhode Island Red that we see there. Okay, so I did mention we wanted to say about our feed routine. So with our feed routine, and there's different approaches to this with meat birds, and we'll talk more about another video, or if y'all have more questions about it, tell me what your questions are. But our feed routine, I just want to tell you, you know, how often the birds have access to food and why we do that. So we let our birds have access to feed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, round the clock, start to finish. All right. Other than when we move them in, when they're hatchlings and they get shipped here from the hatchery and we move them in, there's no feed down on the brooder floor for them when we move them in. Only bedding material and water for like a couple of hours. And we let them settle in and we let the stress of transport dissipate. And then we put feed in about 2 hours after we've moved our birds in, okay? And from that time on, our preference is to let our birds have access to feed 24/7, all right? And we generally use these big metal feeders like this from about 2 weeks on. Prior to this, we use the just plastic feed trays that have a base and a flip top lid with holes in the flip top lid. So we start them out in just the base of the feeders, and then and let them get used to the idea that that's where their feed is. And then after a couple days, they are used to that, and we put the flip top lids on the feeders, and then they eat from those until about 2 weeks of age, and then we switch them into these big metal feeders. Now, I'll show you another kind of feeder that we have used. We have those birds in that feeder too. Let me show you another kind of feeder that we have used and we do like. So we've got the metal feeders there. This plastic one is another kind of big feeder. It actually should have a wing nut at the top. We're missing it, but that's okay. But we've used these. I want to show you what I don't prefer about them. If I can get it turned over here. If I can get it turned over here. Okay. So on the bottom, this is kind of like recessed. It kind of comes to a point, so it leaves a hollow space there. Let me tell you what happened one time. Set that back up there. We had a meat bird, fairly young, but we had a meat bird. So what we used to do was, after we started giving them feed, like I think the first week, we would let them have the feed 24 hours a day. And then we would actually start only putting the feeders in during the daytime, and we would take the feeders out at night. And we call that 12 on, 12 off feed program. Well, you saw that feeder with the red base, and I showed you the hollowed out well underneath the bottom of it. It's kind of a inverted cone shape, I guess. It would probably been about a week-old bird. It must have got underneath that feeder as we were setting it back down in the pen for the 12 hours on of feeding, and we didn't know it. So it was there all day under that feeder until we went in to take the feeders out. And I said, never again. I'm never pulling feeders out of the chicken pen again, because I got a chick trapped under the feeder. Now these metal ones are flat bottoms, so I don't have that issue with these, but still we leave them in. Now sometimes we do let the birds eat them down empty and just empty them, but in general our food routine with them is let them have feed 24/7. Okay, the other two reasons we do that is because we are raising our birds in a barn system indoors, and we raise them with overhead light on all the time. Now some flocks we've used a lighting program where we turn all the overhead lights off for about 4 hours. She's falling asleep. For about 4 hours at a time, every 24-hour period. But we don't do that with every flock, because here's the flip side of that. Most flocks, even though we try to eliminate overhead light for part of the time, most flocks have heat lamps, most of production. So when you have heat lamps on, in order to get the heat, you have some light effect. So we've just left the light on because there's already light from the heat lamps. Now, they will find, like in our building, it's not intense light everywhere, and they still rest. They still rest. Well, you can see them now. Let me zoom out. I mean, they're still going to get their rest, okay? But that's why you would do the lighting program of at least maybe 4 hours of dark every 24-hour period. You would give them a rest time. Also, if you have birds outside, like in a pastured or chicken tractor format for part of their production, then they're getting dark overnight. Okay, so what's going to happen if you introduce dark into their routine is that's going to take them off of feed for that amount of time too. Okay, so the reason that we leave feed in all the time is because we don't want to take 8 to 10 weeks to finish these birds. We want them done in 5 to 6 weeks. So we've gotten really good at finishing them in 6 weeks, and we're still thinking we could work toward finishing them in 5 weeks, but we're not there yet. But we know 6 weeks works consistently. 5 weeks can work, but we haven't got it to work consistently. Okay, but we know 6 weeks works consistently. So because we're basically almost at 5 weeks now, and they're not finished. We don't want them to go now. We want another week on finishing these birds. So we know 6 weeks we can consistently finish meat birds, but we don't want it to take 8 weeks and 10 weeks. If we would do 12 on, 12 off, we would need to give them more time to finish, but we want it to be done in 6 weeks. So we do feed round the clock for the birds. Okay, so that's our feed routine. We do feed a 22% protein value. We prefer Kalmbach feed. We're not sponsored to tell you that, but we like it. It's consistent quality. We get it in a crumble texture. The birds like it. It's palatable to them. They eat it well, and it satisfies their appetite, and it satisfies the nutritional support to ensure their growth and finish. Okay, so yeah, she is laying down. The lighting's not good enough to really let us do a good close-up on her, but there is a size difference there. It's probably fuzzy zoomed in that much, but all of them 34 days old. Okay, so the meat birds will go to the USDA inspected processor in about 9 days on day 43, and their production cycle for meat will have completed in a start to finish period of 6 weeks. The Rhode Island Red, she will stay here on farm with her group, and we'll take a look back over at them, but she'll stay here on farm for probably 3 years, and she'll be part of our egg production program. Okay, so all the birds are going to settle down now. I did say we'd mention about what's going on with temperature. Basically, the meat birds, they want to be 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's 35. We'll get into temperature again another video, but that's why they're going to concentrate under the heat lamps in between active periods, and we encourage them to get up and exercise and go to food and water frequently. So thanks for joining us, y'all. God bless you.